All right, there we go. All right, folks. Here is sort of the brief discussion that I offered you in class for this activity. I'm just going over it again. Some of you may have been absent. Some of you might just want to review some of the terms or directions for the homework. So here we go. Just quick review. One of the reasons, if you recall Rampolla, and again, that first reading of the year that we did, I'm going to appeal to that reading throughout the year because I think it provides a really strong foundation for what history is, how we do it, and why we do it, okay? And this, we're sort of, I'm looking at that third piece, why we do history. Rampolla gives you a number of reasons. This is one of them. We study history to look at events and evidence through different lenses. It's just enormously valuable to develop that sort of empathy. So we just finished our vehicle excavation. This image on the right is meant to capture that. It probably does not look like the vehicle excavation you did. But the idea here was to adopt a future lens and look at data from the present. And I've already read a few of your responses, and you're already coming up with really wonderful and beautiful critiques, observations and critiques of values we hold today. All right. This project that we're going to do is going to look at a couple different lenses. It's going to look at what your first reading will call a progressivist lens and a revisionist lens. Okay, there's a couple other terms that we're going to work on here, but looking at it between those two lenses, progressivist lens, revisionist lens. And to be clear, the first reading that you are going to be doing is a revisionist lens. All right, I'll define those shortly. But before we get started, I do want to draw attention to that second term, agricultural revolution. This is where we are situating ourselves right now. We've looked at early human migrations. We've looked at archaeology of the remote past as well as art. We've conducted our own sort of excavation, and now we're going to look at more complex societies. And by complex societies, some people might call them civilizations, all these bells and whistles of civilization. The agricultural revolution made this possible. So the agricultural revolution is really what allowed people to stay in one place and develop these sorts of densely populated places that allowed individuals to engage in some sort of vocational specialization, right? So you have blacksmiths, maybe teachers, maybe even philosophers, farmers, right? You have this vocational specialization. This is made possible by the agricultural revolution. There are some sort of exceptional cases, even one very local one, Northwest Indians, who were able to accomplish all those bells and whistles of civilization by fishing rather than farming. Japan is another one. But these are really sort of exceptional cases. By and large, the things that all these accoutrements and bells and whistles of civilization are brought to us by farming. So important to root it there. So what you see with a progress narrative, and I'll define that shortly, is a recognition that farming was an enormously important and valuable contribution to society. The revisionist statement will call it the worst mistake in the history of the human race, as Jared Diamond does, okay? Kind of getting ahead of myself. Progress. This is what the progress or progressivist position suggests. Do not get this confused with progressive position. I'll talk about the problems with the confusion with that term toward the end of this presentation. All right, progress. With occasional setbacks, life is better now than it was in the past. All right? Some setbacks might be a little greater than others, but the general trend is up, okay? And I think the stock market is kind of a neat example for that when we think about progress, that image of the stock market. Yes, the Dow goes down, the Dow goes up, but it trends up, right? It trends up. Okay, so this is that progress idea. Occasional setbacks, but life is better now than it was in the past. Regress. Regress says the opposite of progress, okay? That is, there are some occasional developments. We can acknowledge those. But life was better in the past, okay? Life was better in the past. These are our two positions. The progress position has historically been more prominent. Okay. And because that progressive position is maybe more of the status quo or a more prominent position, as you reconsider strengths of positions and attitudes towards positions, this is called revisionism. So in this situation, this idea of regress is defined as a revisionist position, okay? It goes against a generally accepted belief, okay? This is how the Oxford English Dictionary defines it: the theory or practice of revising one's attitude to a previously accepted situation or point of view. We've done this already. Again, appealing to Rampolla, okay? What did we say? Sea peoples. They are largely responsible for the destruction of one of the greatest epics in human history, the Mediterranean Bronze Age. Therefore, villains, the sea peoples. Of course, they don't look like this, but this is the image that I get in my head, especially as you assign all those terrible characteristics to them, of just being people who pillaged and destroyed cities. Beautiful cities of bronze, right? Okay. We want to reconsider this idea. What has forced us to reconsider this idea? Modern refugee crisis. Here we have boat people. Actually, even the term is very similar to sea people. What do we know about the boat people? On balance, actually not even on balance, the great majority of people are not seeking to inflict violence, but fleeing violence of some sort, right? The boat people are fleeing violence, right? Not inflicting violence. Okay, so we have these boat people as opposed to sea people, the dislocations of these people, the movements and migrations are actually very similar to the sea peoples themselves all around the Mediterranean. Well, when we see this modern case study, what does it make us think about these sea peoples or what happened in the past? It makes us reconsider it, right? Perhaps some, even most, maybe, of the sea peoples were fleeing violence rather than agents of violence. Is that a possibility? And it starts with a question, and then we can go back and we can look at the evidence once again with this fresh new idea that's emerged, that this modern case study of the refugee crisis and boat people has allowed historians to reconsider a set of evidence that had gone very largely unchallenged. All right. So this is revisionism. The term has sort of oftentimes is sort of a pejorative sense. So for instance, it's used Like if someone's called a revisionist, it's oftentimes sort of a case of name calling from an individual who holds a status quo position. You're a revisionist, right? And I'd like to sort of break us out of that thinking. Are there some historic positions that have stood the test of time and they're strong and good? Yes, of course. At the same time, we also need to continue to look and reconsider at past events and how they're characterized. All right, we should be in a constant process of revising, and that's what revisionism is. That is not to suggest that in this case you should adhere to a revisionist or narrative of regress as opposed to progress. I open this up to you for what you think holds more weight, the progress narrative or the revisionist one. All right, just real quick, noting these terms, progress versus progressive. The latter term, progressive, is generally used as an adjective to mean sort of on behalf of the poor. So a progressive law or measure is one that helps the poor. I think of the sort of the origins of progressivism in the U.S. with sort of FDR and all of the legislation that he passed during the Great Depression in the United States. These were meant to create better lifestyles for the poor. On the other hand, regressive then means it's a measure that impacts the poor negatively. I think of, so sometimes you see that language of it's a regressive tax. It means that it sort of targets the poor, and the poor will inordinately bear sort of the burden of that tax. One in Seattle that is somewhat recent, I think of the soda tax, for instance, or the sugar tax. Since people with less money are more inclined to buy the cheaper sugary drinks, right? So that was ultimately identified as a regressive tax because it targeted the poor, okay? A lot of flat taxes also are considered regressive. So if we all pay 10% sales tax on something, doesn't matter how much money we have, right? Someone who makes $1 million a year will pay the same as someone who makes $10,000 a year. Some people consider these sorts of flat taxes regressive as well. All right. This is our homework. We are concerned with the first reading. It is a revisionist piece. The author says so himself. And he lets you know very clearly that he is challenging the notions of the progressivist position. So I challenge you to look for two things. Pieces of evidence that, one, support why the revisionist perspective is correct, and two, why the progressivist perspective is incorrect. It's kind of, different sides of the same coin. But as you go through the evidence, you'll see sort of these sorts of pro positions or negative con positions. Those of you who have done more speech and debate are probably more familiar with this sort of way of thinking. Ultimately, I'm not going to punish you if you have difficulty distinguishing pros and cons or if you frame it differently. But I think it is good to start to exercise this muscle. Okay, so a pro example would be hunter and gatherers had more leisure time. That is a pro of the revisionist perspective. Okay, what would a con be for the progressivist perspective? Another way of building an argument, right? Not showing that your way is great, but that their way is not so great, right? So in what way are they going to make the case that the progressive position is not that great? Well, they're going to suggest that. He's going to suggest, Jared Diamond's going to suggest that farming led to social inequality, right? So these are some examples of the pros and cons and how I'd encourage you to do that. All right, I've gone longer than I wanted. As always, connect with me. Questions, thoughts, ideas,